A genius is defined as one who has exceptional intellect or creative power or another natural ability. This week on Full Frame, we'll introduce you to some of the world's 21st century geniuses, from one of the youngest to one of the oldest. One man is being called the next Albert Einstein, and one was a child prodigy. They each offer their own unique gift of high intellect. I'm Mike Welder, coming to you from the heart of New York City's Times Square. Let's take it full frame. Nima Arkani-Hamed is a 21st century genius. He is considered one of the top minds at the forefront of theoretical physics. Known for being a disruptive force in science over the course of his career, his revolutionary theories about the functioning of the universe openly push boundaries. Recently, Arkani-Hamed agreed to serve as the inaugural director of a controversial proposal to build the world's largest particle accelerator in China. The hope is that this powerful machine will find particles that Europe's Large Hadron Collider cannot, propelling science into a new era of physics research. Joining us to talk more about his research, the project, and understanding the universe is Nima Arkani-Hamed. Welcome to Full Frame.
Wonderful pleasure to be here.
So both of your parents were in this field. What was dinner like as a kid? Was it pass the potatoes? What do you think about quantum mechanics? Or
well, it was of course wonderful that my parents were both scientists. I had a very early interest in science, but actually it was natural history. It was catching frogs and salamanders and toads and snakes and freaking out my parents by keeping them in my bedroom and studying their behavior and things like that. I actually like to say that becoming a physicist was my act of teenage rebellion because my parents didn't want me to follow in their footsteps. But
why is that?
Well, I mean, I think just they're interested in a variety. But I think I realized pretty young that of course I loved the natural world, like almost all kids do, and I came pretty early on to also love mathematics. And when I realized that there was such a thing that you could do with your life that used mathematics to understand simple things about the world around you, that was absolutely thrilling. And at around 13, 14 years old, I decided to be a theoretical physicist.
It's interesting. I read somewhere that you said your mission was to understand the universe, and which sounds.
I'm not sure I said that.
Well, okay. Well, I'm going to say you said it.
Sure.
You can disagree with me, but while that sounds simple, it's really quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, one could spend their entire life working on that.
Well, I think there are many different aspects to understanding the universe. Science is a humongous, enormous field with all sorts of different things going on. The particular part of science that my colleagues and I focus on, fundamental physics, is in many ways the oldest and most mature part of science. In a sense, the questions that we are talking about, people first started posing in a somewhat ill-posed way, but still first started vaguely talking about with the ancient Greeks 2,000 years ago. And then in a more modern form, people like Kepler and Galileo and Newton really had this basic realization that physical laws are governed by simple and deep ideas that are best formulated in the language of mathematics. And that set us down a trajectory that we've been really following for 4 centuries since. And what we're doing now isn't really qualitatively different than what they were doing 400 years ago. We're just much further along this process. So it's a very small part of science, but it's, of course, for those of us doing it, we think it's a very singular and very important part of science to try to understand this basic mathematical character of the laws of nature at the simplest and deepest possible level. And that's the big surprise. That's so when you ask what is it you do when you wake up in the morning and you're trying to understand the laws of nature or understand the universe, the fascinating thing is that we've understood over this 400-year process that this seeming dizzying variety and array of different phenomena that we see in the universe around us turn out to be, as we study things more and more deeply, differing aspects of something that's more unified and described by often more alien and stranger, but simple and deep mathematical equations. And because of this fact, because of the fact that things seem to be getting simpler and deeper as time goes on, we have something concrete to do when we wake up in the morning, because we can try to latch on to one aspect of the problems and the mysteries that are confronting us, and try to see if we can make some progress on them by monkeying with the rules a little bit. And we're tremendously constrained by the 400 years of success that we've had so far, because almost every idea you have for how to change things to deal with some of the current paradoxes or mysteries is going to be wrong. It's going to be wrong because we understand so much about the way the world works already, that if you monkey around with things a little bit, you're almost immediately going to be ruled out by things that we've known for a long time already.
Well, that's the interesting thing is, you know, when I do a show, I'm searching for answers, but much of your life is searching for questions and the right questions, isn't it?
That's absolutely true. I mean, it's the most interesting aspect of the transition between being an enthusiastic youngster in this part of science and becoming a professional researcher. You spend a lot of your life when you're in high school, when you're an undergraduate, learning how to solve problems that are well posed. You solve problems on exams, you solve problems on problem sets. You sharpen the skill for once a problem becomes well defined, being able to go and solve it. And then you realize that 99.99% of life when you're trying to do research is to figure out what the correct questions are to ask. And everything is much more chaotic than the sort of cookie-cutter picture of the way science works that we unfortunately sometimes teach or tell people. The cart comes before the horse all the time. Sometimes you're in the possession of the right answer to some set of questions before you quite know what the question is. And then, and because you have the right answer, you sort of figure out what the question was that this right answer is answering. Very often, especially in this part of theoretical physics, you're in possession of the correct equations before you know exactly what they mean. And is
that maddening?
Well, it's not maddening. This is part of the gift from nature, if you like, that it seems to be described by mathematical laws, is that while human language and our grammar and these things that are hardwired into our brains aren't perfectly suited to describing the world, and it leads us to paradoxes and confusions. The equations have this perfection to them, and they know much more about what's going on in the world than we do.
I want you to go back over something you said before we started the broadcast, which was this ocean of ignorance, this analogy that you talked about. Describe it for us.
Well, this is not my analogy, as I was describing to you earlier. One of my favorite Nobel laureates in physics in our field is won the Nobel Prize back in 2004. David Gross likes to use this analogy that we now know a fair amount about the way the world works. But one of the things this analogy is supposed to explain is what may seem like a mysterious fact, that the more we learn about the world, the more it seems, the more questions we get to ask. It's not that we get to ask fewer questions, but that we come closer to a feeling of finality. In fact, as time goes on, we learn more and we get to ask more and more questions. And there's a nice picture for this, which is to imagine that there's there's this vast ocean of ignorance out there, dark, things that we don't understand. And there's a little space in this big world that we have carved out, space of things we do understand. It's like the inside of a sphere or a ball. Of course, deep in the center of this ball are the things that we've understood for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they're in textbooks, and we teach the kids in junior high school. But as we get closer to the cutting edge of science, as researchers, we're close to the edge of this ball, and our purpose in life is to try to push the edge a little further out into the take some of the this ocean of ignorance out and replace it with things that we understand. So this ball is getting bigger as time goes on, if we're successful, right? But you see, there's something interesting. As the ball gets bigger, of course, the sort of volume of the ball is getting bigger. We know more things. But the surface area of the ball is also getting bigger, which means that there's more and more new kinds of questions that we get to ask that we didn't even know we could ask before. And so that's a nice analogy. It is a deep fact. It is a deep fact that the more we understand about the way the world works, the more questions we get to ask. And what makes it deep is that some of the questions we get to ask, we didn't even know were questions before we had the new understanding.
Let me get back to the sphere, this circle that you described, and this ocean of ignorance. It's going to grow because of what you're going to be doing in China. There's no doubt about it. So
Absolutely,
talk to me about that. How did it come about, and what's the hope there for you?
Well, you know, physics is an experimental science. It's a science. So we have a lot of mysteries. We have a lot of puzzles, but we need to make measurements and observations in order to give us clues about what the right answers are to some of the big questions facing us. And this part of physics, fundamental physics, the experiments that are involved are at the extremes of our sort of frontiers of what we see in the world. We have to do observations and measurements on the largest possible scales, look at the structure of the universe, and cosmology ultimately on the very largest possible scales. That's one class of experiments. And another class of experiments is to probe the shortest possible distances, to probe what the laws of nature are like and what they're doing at the tiniest possible scales. Now, there's an extra layer of importance associated with this idea of probing things at the tiniest possible scales, because we've learned over the last 100 years that it's when we study nature at the shortest possible distances that the fundamental simplicity, unity, and the sort of deepest aspects of the physical laws are revealed there. The experiments that are being done at the Large Hadron Collider today are probing distances that are around 100 times smaller than the nucleus of the atom. And the nucleus of the atom is itself 1,000,000 times smaller than the atom itself. So we're really looking at things at incredibly tiny distances. That's why this machine is 27 kilometers around in Geneva. It smashes particles into each other, two sets of particles going around this 27-kilometer ring, one going around this way, one going around the other way. They're going at 0.9999999 times the speed of light. And we do all of that in order to, when they smash into each other, reveal something about what's going on at this distance around 100 times smaller than the nucleus of the atom. Now, it turns out that the Large Hadron Collider made an incredible discovery back on July 4th, 2012. It discovered the famous Higgs particle. And this is a classic example of a discovery that opens up many, many more questions than it resolves. Because while from one point of view, theoretical physicists had expected the Higgs particle to exist for something like 50 years, from a more sophisticated, more advanced point of view, it's utterly mystifying that it exists and it has the properties that it has. In fact, it's sort of insane that something like the Higgs exists. It calls into question some very fundamental things that we believe about the two foundational principles of early 20th century physics, the principles of relativity that Einstein gave us, and the laws of quantum mechanics. These principles are shockingly successful. We see nothing wrong with them. They work over every kind of experiment we've done, every question that we've asked, every way that we've hit these principles, they've survived. And yet these very principles would seem to make something like the Higgs particle impossible. And yet there it is, it exists. So what we need to do is, the Large Hadron Collider was 30 years in the planning. It ran for quite a while until it finally discovered the Higgs. But it just brought us to the point of maximal confusion from the theoretical point of view. There's something deeply wrong, not a little bit wrong, not approximately wrong. There's something deeply wrong about our understanding of nature, which is associated with the Higgs particle. So we need to study it better.
So where does the collider in China fit in?
The purpose of the collider in China is to study the Higgs and to study it, to put it under much more powerful microscope than we've managed to do, or we will ever do with the Large Hadron Collider. you need to build a machine that's going to produce millions of Higgs particles and study them. Study them in detail, look at them, look at how the Higgs interacts with other particles. Ultimately, look to see how the Higgs particle interacts with itself. And only by looking at these, properties can we settle some of these profound questions about ultimately deeper aspects of quantum mechanics and space-time. And what happened a couple of years ago, you see, these large accelerator projects take roughly 3 decades from when they're first the twinkle in someone's eye to when they're fully operational and they give you all the results that you're interested in. It took roughly 25 years with the LHC itself. So right after the Higgs discovery in 2012, it was obvious to all of us in the field, certainly obvious to me, it's obvious to many people, that this was the ideal time to start. We knew what the next step was. We had to study this damn thing in tremendous, we had to put it under this 10, 20, 30 times higher resolution. But because these things take so long to plan, the time to start thinking about doing something about it was now. And I heard from a number of my friends that there was a proposal in China for doing this. And I went to Beijing and I talked to Yifang Wang, who's the head of the Institute for High Energy Physics in Beijing. And it became very clear to me that they were extremely serious, and they had vision, they had ambition, and they wanted to try to pull something like this off. Now, this is not an incremental step for China. It's a humongous leap compared to anything that they've done before. It's really ambitious. It's really big, and that's of course what makes it so exciting. It's really big as a scientific project. It would be really big anywhere as a scientific project. It's an especially ambitious undertaking because right now the largest accelerator that China has is a 250-meter around accelerator in Beijing, where the thing that we're talking about might be as large as 100 kilometers around. Okay, so it's a humongous leap. But we know how to do it. The technology for how to build this machine exists.
And it's a win-win, as you say. You know, it's the importance of that connection between people like yourself going over there and kind of the sharing of it's cross-pollination in a sense. I mean, it's a larger step in many respects.
The reason I'm personally so excited about this machine, specifically in China, and my friends in Europe are thinking about, many of my friends in Europe are thinking about building the next generation machine like this there. I mean, right, a machine larger than the LHC at around the same site where the Large Hadron Collider is now. But I think there is something extra special and great about doing this in China. And there's one aspect of it that's purely, totally idealistic. It's hard to imagine taking this next big step. And you know, this experiment is going to take roughly 10,000 people working on it in order to get all the results out of it we want. Right now, at the Large Hadron Collider, we have 2 teams of 3,000 people each working on 2 experiments. This is going to be even bigger, and it's going to take more cooperation, more thought, more dedication. It's around 10,000 people that we're talking about. It's going to be a large international community of people working on this sort of thing. It's hard to imagine that we're going to be able to pull it off without engaging, really actively engaging, 1 billion of the world's most talented and interesting people into fundamental physics. So that's one aspect where I think it would just be incredible to get China involved, just so we can have access, purely selfishly, as far as physics is concerned, to that ocean of talent. But I think as far as China is concerned, there's obvious positives as well. First of all, there's going to be a fascinating, as you're referring to, there's going to be, I think, a fascinating merge of East and West being brought together for a common purpose. And just as a just the cultural aspects of that are extremely interesting. It'll be a very important way of fostering at a very high level deep friendships between deep important friendships between East and West. That's one aspect. Another aspect, purely selfishly from the Chinese point of view, is that while these machines, these projects are indeed they're expensive, they cost billions of dollars. It's a sort of investment you can make where, unlike any other field of science, it's not possible to do this in any other field of science, but if you make this large investment in this field of science, you're guaranteed to be the leader of the world in that field by the time you're done. And that's because we're not going to have 12 of these machines lying around all over the world, and the physics community will go where the machine is. And I think that's the cultural challenge associated with that, how it will work, international cooperation, all these things are yet to be worked out, and it's going to be very interesting to see how they are worked out. But I think...
Let me ask one final question. I think you hit on this earlier before we had a chance to just kind of visit. You were talking about bold leadership of countries, and back in the 60s, John F. Kennedy saying, we're going to put a man on the moon. Right. The importance of that, obviously it's important to put a man on the moon, but the importance of that commitment to the science community, China's government is doing that with this. Talk to me about, and it's cost an enormous amount of money, but the payoff, while it may not be apparent today, over the long term is huge, right?
Yeah, I think we live in a world with increasingly difficult challenges. And a lot of these challenges face us, and we have to deal with them not on the time scale of 6 months or a year, but we have to think ahead. We have to plan for a year, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years. The world is increasingly technical. We need to have a large group of talented people who know what it's like to be technically trained and to think about problems that are going to not be solved in 2 weeks or 3 months based on some small incremental iteration of what the guy previously did, but which might take radically new ideas, but which might also take 5 or 10 or 20 years to germinate. The importance of fundamental physics is we are that field that have been doing exactly that for 4 centuries now. It's a small group of people. We're not a huge part of the, even with these very big expensive machines, we're talking about 1 part in 10,000 or 1 part in 100,000 of GDP, depending on how you, on how you count. We're small perturbation on the economy, but it's something that we do. We train people just by osmosis. You don't learn this in books. You have to be around people who know how to do it. What it's like to tackle questions which seem impossible at first. You don't even know remotely how you're going to start thinking about them. And yet we've been doing this for 400 years. You gradually start chipping away. The power of the scientific method to weed out wrong ideas and slightly push forward ideas that have something correct about them, even if they're not the right answer, until you gradually converge on the right way of thinking about things. This is just as a practical thing. We are that part of science, I think, who've been doing this the longest and who have this long-term vision and infuse this in the way people think about things. And it's finally related, I think the ultimate benefit to, the deepest benefit to society as a whole is to live to be part of a people, to be part of a country, where you do things like this. And it's not just fundamental physics. We want to go to space. We want to do all kinds of other things which push us to the very limits, are as singular as possible, but have a purity of purpose, a certain nobility to them. And it's important to feel that you live in a country which does really big things. And I think this machine would be one element of making something like that happen in China.
Nima, thank you so much for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Coming up next, we speak with one of the world's oldest and most inventive inventors. Yashiro Nakamatsu is one of the world's most famous inventors. He likes to be called by his nickname, Sir Dr. Nakamats. But admirers call him Japan's Edison. But he's even got Thomas Edison beat, running circles around him with at least 3,000 patents. In case you're wondering, Edison, who invented the light bulb and the phonograph, lags far behind with the second most patents in the world. The 87-year-old human dynamo has also written dozens of books, and he's repeatedly run for political office in Japan. Perhaps his best-known invention is the floppy disk. While many of his creations are serious, he's also come up with some amusing gadgets, like a musical golf putter. I recently spoke with Dr. Nakamats, who joined me from Tokyo in our Washington, D.C. studios. Let me start by talking to you about Edison. You know, you're compared to him so often. You're this renowned inventor. What do you think the differences are between you and Edison?
I think Edison has no education. And I think the real invention should be three elements. First, theory. Second, picker. Third, practicality. These three elements is important. And unfortunately, in case of Edison, the first theory is he is made by experiment, not by knowledge, because he is not educated. This is a difference.
But what's interesting is your first invention came at such an early age, didn't it? I mean, you were just a little kid when you made your first invention, correct?
Yes, age of 5. That is automatic airplane adjusting center of lift and center of gravity automatically.
Unbelievable. Now, talk to me about you know, your nurturing that you had as a child growing up. Do you think it was that environment? Were your parents nurturing, and they brought out that instinct in you?
I think DNA is very important. My mother was very creative, and grandfather, that is my mother's father, also very creative. He was a doctor, medical doctor, and he opened a hospital in America and Japan, and he made many inventions, including color film.
I want to get into some of your inventions in just a minute, but I want to get an inventor's worldview. I mean, does an inventor look at the world differently than the rest of us in that perhaps they look at it and say, well, this is the way it looks now, but let me think about how it could be much better, and that's why they come up with inventions. I mean, how do you think differently than a regular person, do you think?
I think, as I said before, three elements. First, theory. Second, flash. And the third, practicality. These three elements is very difficult to make by normal people.
Which invention brought you the most joy?
My answer is, do you have children?
Yes, I do. I see where you're going with this. That is the answer, isn't it?
That's right.
Okay, well, then I won't make you choose, but I think the one that most of us think about is the floppy disk. When you came up with the floppy disk, did you think that it would just revolutionize things? I mean, can you see how it's going to change the world?
It was invented in 1947, and it was completed 1952 when I was the University of Tokyo. Then, after 25 years from my invention, IBM started production and marketing. So I licensed to them. So, you know, invention takes time, such as 25 years in case of floppy disk.
So 25 years later, it's in production. What was the feeling like when you started to see it popping up everywhere? I mean, it became such a part of the world.
Yes, I think by my invention, computer revolutionized and the IT industry started. So I think really invention is change the world, but not for money. My spirit of invention is love.
Can you talk to me a little bit about your creative process? Because I think it's fascinating. I've seen video of you where you're swimming underwater. You've got a notepad and a pen. It's a little bit different than how most of us work and how we kind of tinker with our ideas. Talk to us about how you came up with the idea, first of all, and what it is that you do.
Well, if we have oxygen, we can make only normal idea. Therefore, I shall dive under the water. There is no oxygen. Then my brain needs oxygen. Then my brain must work very hard. That is my theory to create excellent inventions under the water.
There's some other things that are interesting about your practices, and I've seen some video about this as well. Eating one meal a day, taking pictures of the meal. You don't sleep as much as the rest of us. Walk us through some of these different things that are that you've kind of adopted over time, and why you've done that.
Because 3 meals per day is too much. And I think, according to my experience, only 1 meal per day means will bring best condition of brain. And not only taking 1 meal, but also you must select quality of meal. Therefore, I took all my pictures every day, still continuing. Present time, 44 years continuing, taking all my meals, and then analyze, and then take my blood, compare blood conditions and meal.
If there's a 5-year-old watching this out there and they're saying, I want to follow in his footsteps, I want to create something right now and continue to do so throughout the rest of my life, any advice you'd give them?
I think mother is very important. In my case, my mother was very intellectual mother, and she taught me at my age of 3, physics, chemistry, mathematics, many things from age of 3. This is the reason I could invent at age of 5. So mother's power is very important.
We've spent a lot of time talking about your brain, your mind. You've created so many things. One thing we haven't spent a lot of time talking about, but I do want to ask you a question about it, and that's your nose. You love cameras, and you don't pick them with just your eyes. Your nose is also involved in the process. Explain for our viewers how you go about selecting cameras.
Yes. Usually, in order to select camera, usually looks lens or body mechanism, or these things. But in my case, of course, I shall do check. But in addition to this, my method is smell camera. This is a very good test because smell express all quality of camera process. Please try.
What should I be looking for when I'm smelling the camera?
Now I'm smelling.
Is that a good one?
Yeah, that's a good one.
What's it smell like?
Very good smell. This is the latest camera.
Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for visiting with us. Certainly appreciate it.
Okay, all right. Very good.
So long. Coming up next, meet a young student who is ahead of her class, way ahead. Most young girls her age were attending sleepovers and playing video games, but not Thessalonica Arzu Embry. Instead of being a typical kid, she was busy graduating high school at the age of, get this, 11. By 14, she completed a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. Homeschooled by her mother from a young age, her high IQ is only one part of her laundry list of talents. She's also determined, ambitious, and curious. Last year, at the age of 16, Arzu Embry received her master's degree, and now at 17, she is working on her doctoral degree in aviation psychology. Along the way, she also managed to author 5 books covering topics from expediting the completion of college, securing justice, to financial investing. She also created a program called JUMP that helps students complete college as quickly as possible so they can enter society and do the most good. In the midst of her busy academic life, Arzu Embry has made time to join us to talk about her unique journey and how she's accomplished so much in so very little time. Thank you for coming in and making me feel so insignificant, which I guess everybody kind of has that feeling when you start measuring you. Even Albert Einstein, I was just reading this, your IQ is 199. Einstein's was determined to be about 30 points. You're 30 points higher than Einstein. How did you feel when somebody told you that? What was that like?
Well, I was well, first I want to say thanks for inviting me here. I'm really glad to be on the show, and I look forward to encouraging the audience. I was very excited about the IQ being 199, but I feel glad because I'm placed in a position to help society in deep ways, in as many ways as possible.
So let me ask you about learning. Was it evident early on that that brain was racing at a much higher level than the rest of us?
Well, yes, because I think it's a matter of applying what a person has learned to the general society. So, for example, when I was 4 years old and I went to the doctor's office, I remember checking out their license online and making sure the medicines they prescribed was the correct medicines to take for whatever issue I went in there for.
You know, I was reading, it was interesting, I started reading, you've sparked a lot of interest to me. I started reading about child geniuses, which clearly you fall into that category. And one person put it this way. They say most of us have a beginning, middle, and end, not child geniuses. It's almost 0 to 60. And I would think in some respects that's fantastic, but in some respects maybe it's tough for a young kid. Can you talk to me about that duality? Were there difficulties given the fact that a lot of other kids probably weren't at your level?
Well, I think it gives an edge because I'm able to communicate with people of different ages and not just people of the same age. And being able to communicate on different levels has been very helpful because I'm able to relate to people and get things done like business.
The genius race, there's a question in here, and I want you to talk to me a little bit about it. It's question 15. Are you a genius for a limited time period? Is that something you've struggled with or thought about? Because obviously I think of you as being a genius forever, but is that something a genius thinks about?
Well, a lot of people ask that because when they get a certain age, they feel like as they get in their middle age that their cognition level changes and they may not react to certain things like fast enough. So, for example, when you're sitting at a stoplight and the light changes from red to green, it takes them like a few seconds longer to react that the light changed to green before they drive off. And so some people feel like it's their like reaction time waning. And then they consider themselves less intelligent or less intelligent as they get older. And so, in my opinion, I don't think that people have to be subject to the fact that their intelligence determines if they're a genius.
You've done so much, and you've written all of these books. Do you know how to goof off?
Yes.
You do?
Yes.
Because I'm not sure. Do you have time for it?
Yes, comedy is my favorite genre of movies.
So you do find time for it. What about the pressure, having excelled and been so successful at such a young age? Do you feel like, you know, how do I top this? I mean, does that ever enter your mind, or is that even a concern of yours?
No, that's not a concern because achievements is not necessarily the biggest priority. The priority is to help society and create businesses that would create more like inventions and things that would strengthen the bigger part of society. So that's my main goal. So I'm not just thinking like I want to top it. I'm just thinking of more ways I can help society.
But you're so young.
Yes.
Look into your crystal ball. I mean, what do you hope to be successful at age 35 or 45? Because I think the other thing that must happen is, you know, you have all this curiosity and this knowledge, but you're continuing to try and expand on that. I mean, do you see yourself as doing maybe this until I'm 30, and then I'm going to start doing this from 30 to 40? I mean, how do you view the horizon?
Yes, I'm still working on my life plan, and I see that my bigger goal right now is to start developing a company that will be as large as Blackstone, an investment company, and directly compete with it and become a Fortune 50 company.
Don't dream small, dream big.
Right.
Thank you so much for coming on the broadcast. It's been great fun.
We'll
be right back with the woman named in the Guinness Book of World Records as the person with the highest IQ in the world, and she achieved that by the age of 10. Marilyn Voss Savant is a national columnist, author, company executive, and, by the way, a genius. Tested at 10 years old, her record IQ score of 228 was shrouded in secrecy. But in 1986, word got out, so she landed at the top of the Guinness Book of World Records Smartest People in the World list for both child and adult IQ scores. Since then, her super genius status has kept her in the news and given her international fame. While her IQ is more than double that of a normal person, she's much more than a score. Savant has been writing a question and answer column called Ask Marilyn for Parade magazine for 30 years. The syndicated Sunday magazine is read by roughly 80 million people in the U.S. When she's not entertaining questions, she's also a wife, a mother, a grandmother, and an avid ballroom dancer. Joining us now to talk about her extraordinary life is Marilyn, and thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
So I mentioned shrouded in secrecy. Do you think it was right that your parents didn't tell you right off the bat, hey, you're off the charts with this number?
Oh, actually, that wasn't shrouded in secrecy. You mean from the world, not from me. Back when I was a kid, I was tested back when I was 8, 9, 10, 11, and on into adulthood. I've taken a lot of tests throughout my life. But back then, when I was 10 years old, that was the score that you mentioned. There have been scores since then. It wasn't anything new to me. My parents knew, my friends knew, my teachers knew, I knew. I just thought, I thought there were a few more people like me in the world. You know, I knew what it was like. But it turns out that there weren't. That was the only odd thing, I suppose, that people didn't tell me at the time, that it was really a rare score. I thought that there were quite a few people like that, and actually, I still do. But you know, at the time, it wouldn't have mattered much if I had paid more attention to that, because at that time, it wasn't thought that women were suited to do anything in particular with their intelligence. So I wasn't encouraged in any way whatsoever.
You know, I saw an interview with you where you said you had permissive upbringing. Your parents were, in a sense, you'd go to them with a question, well, you go find it out. They kind of sparked that interest in you to seek out knowledge and curiosity. Can you talk to me about the difficulty of parenting a super genius, and how did they respond to it, do you think?
Well, I don't really think they paid a lot of attention to that. You have to understand my background. My grandparents were coal miners. One of my grandfathers was killed in the mines. Another grandfather was injured so badly in the mines he could only walk with a cane afterward. My parents were immigrants from Germany and Italy, and they weren't thinking about focusing on the kids at all. The whole idea was to just be independent, earn a living, and no one really paid much attention to me, actually. As I said, mostly because I was a girl, and I accepted that.
Did you feel different at all, though?
You know, I think we all feel a little bit different at times. But I felt different in the sense that we all have these unique qualities. I felt that I had mine, and everyone, people liked that. They respected me for that. The way we respect people for their particular skills and abilities. One thing that I noticed in particular, though, that at the time, and then later throughout life especially, people that we think are very smart are not necessarily very smart. They are more likely to be educated in their particular field or very experienced in their careers. And we confuse that with smartness. So when we call upon experts, we hear them say whatever it is they have to say, but that doesn't mean they have any analytical ability. That doesn't mean they have the ability to process the information at hand. That's really more what intelligence is.
I've even heard you say that perhaps you shouldn't pair the two words best and brightest because they aren't necessarily the same thing.
Well, I suppose that's true too. You know, when you think of scientists, for example, people tend to think that scientists are the smartest people in the world, and the smartest people in the world should become scientists. I disagree with that completely. When I look back at my own life, when I was a kid, I'd mentioned to you that no one gave me any encouragement, which is, this is not a complaint, it's a fact of life. It's not a big deal, it didn't bother me then, I don't really think it bothers me now. But at the time, as I said, women weren't thought to be suited to do anything in particular with their intelligence, with the one possible exception would be if you were smart, you'd go into the scientific field naturally. And no one said that to me, but looking back, that was really the only option if I had options. And back then, I couldn't imagine looking through the world, looking at the world through a microscope or a telescope. That was anathema to me. I just don't feel that I could have focused that tightly on something all of the time. Fine for school, fine for certain limited tasks, but not as a worldview. I wanted something much broader than that. If I had, you know, looking back, if I had it all to do over again, or if I could just have somehow had some maturity when I was, you know, 13 or 17 or whatever, I'd become a politician. Now, politicians are not synonymous with smarts, I know.
I was going to say, we're seeing a couple of
Right.
candidates out there that I'm not sure at your IQ level.
Yeah, right. But wouldn't you rather see a really smart person in front of a microphone instead of, as I said, looking at the world through a microscope or a telescope?
That's genius. Let me ask you about finding your way as a genius, because I can count amongst my friends, most of them, I've had the conversation where they're like, oh my God, my boss is an idiot. So, and we're just regular people. So
That could be.
Well, I'm not sure I'd argue with them. But I'm just wondering, as a genius, how difficult it must be to go to work each day and just not have, you know, mental gymnasts making the decisions and you're kind of the worker bee under them.
I see what you mean. Well, the world isn't like that. We don't necessarily have smart people running the show because they may not be social people, they may not be organized people. They're all different kinds of skills. We all have this mix of skills. I notice in particular that sometimes I feel pretty alone, and sometimes I could, you know, that can especially happen when I'm alone, you know, that can happen when I'm in a room full of people. That's one of the times that I actually feel alone. But as far as being...
Why is that, do you think?
Well, there's this feeling that if I need answers, if I want to turn to someone, I really don't have anyone to turn to. I do the best I can. I have to accept that. Maybe it's the fact that we all need to do that.
So, having a high IQ, is it a burden or a gift or both?
Oh, it's an absolute blessing. It's never a burden. I take it back. If you're on an airline seat next to someone who knows your name, then it's a burden. Believe me, it's a real burden. You have to pretend to, you know, go to sleep. But other than that, it is a blessing. It is a blessing. Privately, personally, professionally, in every way.
Let me ask you about your marriage, because I think it's this unique marriage where it's the heart and the head. I mean, and you know why I'm saying that. I mean, your husband clearly has made his mark in the world too with the Jarvik device, which is obviously keeping people alive. So clearly a very bright man. Did he feel intimidated dating you? I mean, what was the relationship like, and what was it like finding somebody who you felt comfortable with on an intellectual basis?
Well, he is intimidated by nothing, by no one. I can't possibly intimidate him. I would enjoy doing that. I think it would teach him a lesson now and then, but no, he can't be intimidated. That's something that we have enjoyed very much together, the intellectual give and take. However, I have that with a lot of people. I have communication with people all over the world, really, through the column that I write for Parade magazine, which is, its reach is vast. But I have this communication with so many different types of people. People who think emotionally, people who think rationally, people who are looking for advice, suggestions, inspiration, support. I hope I provide that, I think I do, to a lot of people. People with very little position and people with significant positions. And so this is a very rich intellectual life that I enjoy, and I hope I'm doing some good with it. I do the best I can.
Let me ask you about that. How did it start, the column?
Parade was writing an article about me, and so when they did that, the editor, someone there, I think it was the editor, just had the idea, well, let's ask Marilyn some classic questions of the, I don't know how many angels can dance on the head of a pin variety. There's questions that have perplexed and confounded scholars and philosophers for centuries. We're going to ask you those questions, Marilyn. I said, excuse me, but how much of an ego do you think I have that I'm going to be able to just spin off a paragraph and answer something that people have pondered since Socrates? No, I'm not going to be able to do that. But if the readers would like to ask some questions, fine. Let's do that. Let's just see what happens. And so it turns out they got a flood of questions. And they were very pleased with that and said, well, maybe we could tiptoe into writing a column. Would you like to try it again? So I did, and that slowly turned into something. And so it turned into a column whereby now, as I said, through Parade's saturation of the people here in the United States, plus, as I said, seeding this throughout the world, I hear from people everywhere about all kinds of things. So it's great fun for me.
You mentioned there are problems that need to be solved. So let me pose this question to you, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Let's say you weren't born when you were born. Let's say you were born 3 or 4 years ago. Do you think that a smart girl growing up today has, because you talked about how much wasn't expected of you because you were a girl, growing up. Do you think that dynamic has changed, or does there still need to be more of an evolution? Are smart girls now treated differently than smart girls when you were a little girl, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. They're treated better. But the women now, you mentioned being born 3 or 4 years ago, so you don't know what's going to be happening in 25 years.
But is there a difference still between, are smart men or smart boys still perhaps on a pedestal above girls, or is there more of a parity now, would you say?
I think they're still on a pedestal, and I can understand that in some ways.
But you don't agree with it. Who would, right?
Well, one of the bad things is that women are their own worst enemy in some ways. In other words, when women play up sex appeal, which they virtually all do, it's terribly damaging to them. Now, in certain fields, fine, of course, entertainment, if one's going to be a singer, a model, an actress, there are lots of places where sex appeal, in other words, attractiveness, is part of the package. That's fine. They do that, and the men do that too. But in business, in, let's say, politics, and lots of other areas, when the women are attempting to wear a great deal of makeup, there's the hairstyle, and we all know what that means. When it's done in a way to look physically appealing, it makes them look lightweight. And a huge number of women are doing that, and until they cut that out, they're not going to have parity with men who are sitting there looking the way you do. You know, you look like your real self. Presumably, well, yeah, I realize.
But I have zero sex appeal, that's why.
Well, of course, the men on the air are wearing a little bit of makeup too, but the point is just to smooth it out and look natural. But the women are doing that. They're appealing. You know, they're attempting to look physically attractive.
Let me ask you one final question because we got to go. But I tend to every once in a while lose my keys, and then I walk around the house saying, I'm such an idiot, you know, where did I put those? Have you ever once uttered those words? Because obviously in your case it would be a lie.
Oh, I do that all the time. Perfectly normal. Nobody should worry about it. But I realize that as soon as you're something like 50 years old, the first time you lose your keys afterward, you think, oh my gosh, I'm going downhill. Don't worry about it. Just get as much mental exercise as you get physical exercise. Oh, wait, maybe a whole lot more than that, and everything will be fine.
Marilyn, what a delight. Thanks so much for coming in. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's it for this week. The conversation with us on social media. We are CCTV America on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And now you can watch Full Frame on our mobile app, available worldwide on any smartphone for free. Get the latest news headlines and connect to us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Weibo. Search CCTV America on your app store to download today. All of our interviews can still also be found online at cctv-america.com. And let us know what you'd like us to take Full Frame next. Simply email us at fullframe@cctv-america.com. Until then, I'm Mike Walter in New York City. We'll see you next time.